HIPcast is brought to you by Enterprise Social Record. Today's episode of HIPcast is brought to you by MRO. MRO, the leading clinical data exchange company in healthcare. MRO is accelerating the exchange of clinical data throughout the healthcare ecosystem on behalf of providers, payers, and users of clinical data. MRO supports health systems, hospitals, and clinics by simplifying the exchange of information with requesters through release of information and revenue integrity solutions. MRO's technology-driven and service-backed framework has enhanced efficiencies, reduced risk, and increased compliance for over 23 years. For more information on how MRO is empowering providers with interoperable solutions to improve clinical data exchange, visit www.mrocorp.com.
Well, today we have a unique kind of conversation happening. This is not going to be about a health information barrier or success story, at least from a health information professional standpoint. We're actually going to talk about the bigger picture of interoperability and women in cybersecurity and women in leadership. Specifically women in leadership with cybersecurity. We at the THIMA annual meeting this past March had the opportunity to have Janice Reece come and present to us, to all of our members in Tennessee. And the conversation was so fascinating and so informative and educational. We wanted to have Janice come on so that health information professionals across the country who listen to HIPcast would have the opportunity to kind of know what's going on with FHIR and interoperability and be inspired by the women in leadership. So I'm going to read just a few of Janice's roles. And then we'll invite Janice to the conversation and we'll get started. So Janice is a senior consultant with Point of Care Partners. And in that role, she also leads the HL7 FAST or HL7 FHIR at Scale Task Force initiative for the nation. She volunteers with the Health Sector Coordinating Council Cybersecurity Working Group. She's the president of WiCyS, Women in Cybersecurity. She is an affiliate and VP of Women in Cybersecurity Tennessee affiliate. Janice, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Shannan and Seth. I really enjoy the opportunity to be here and have a conversation with you today about healthcare and the FHIR FAST Healthcare Information Resource, which is what FHIR stands for.
Yeah, last time we were in Montgomery Bell State Park at the THIMA meeting. It was a beautiful setting, so I'll have to have you back at the Tennessee meeting. But we recently, our previous episode was with the help me Shannan, health API guy, Brendan Keeler.
Brendan, yes.
Yeah.
I see Brendan everywhere.
Yeah, fantastic conversation. So we're kind of continuing the same interoperable, a fun word, conversation, but this time adding in a bit of cybersecurity. So we'll jump right in and ask the first question. You know, hospitals or healthcare organizations in general are marching towards digital transformation. I've heard that term for 25 years now. So I don't know if we're marching towards it or we're floundering in it, but they're definitely focused on digital transformation. But there's a critical need there for robust cybersecurity, especially as they implement FHIR-based interoperability frameworks like TEFCA. So how can healthcare organizations balance all of these things?
I think it's the opportunity for the intersection, as you said, for cybersecurity and healthcare interoperability. It's more critical than ever. And that's really one of the biggest areas that FAST has been tasked to work with. It was an organization that was spun out of ONC and then picked up by HL7, which is an international organization working on standards. And what we are doing is developing a secure, scalable, and trust-based data exchange framework that can meet the demands of real-world healthcare delivery, but also fit into those initiatives like TEFCA, the Trusted Exchange Framework Common Agreement. Some of the opportunities that have recently been mentioned with CMS with their recent RFI on healthcare technology. And then they also hosted a CMS listening session in DC, which some of my colleagues were able to attend, including our FAST steering committee co-chairs, and worked with the different discussions on some of the goals that they have to accomplish. And that is all tied to the underlying of the foundation, as they called it, the plumbing of the infrastructure for connecting that ecosystem.
Well, the plumbing is actually a good way to describe that. But here's a question that I'll throw at you. For a lot of our listeners, we have several revenue cycle folks that are more in the coding world, the billing codes, those type things, versus the IT or IT system coding type scenarios. But and we also have a lot of students and privacy officers. Perhaps give us a general overview of kind of the work that you're working on and how that relates to the hospitals and healthcare, health information flow in general.
Yeah, so what FHIR does is it gives us a technical foundation for modern, what they call API-driven interoperability. And then we have frameworks like TEFCA, which is the Trusted Exchange Framework Common Agreement, that are kind of helping establish both the governance and trust infrastructure needed for that national data exchange. Because the only way we're going to get all this data together is to have that foundation and understand how we can kind of apply that for framework. So fast security and identity implementation guides are two of the key areas that we're developing underneath FAST. And these are designed to work alongside TEFCA, kind of enabling organizations to exchange data securely, as well as with authentication and authorized access. These are aligning tools like in our fast security that are already standards out there, like OAuth, like UDAP, a Unified Data Access Profile, like OpenID Connect, and supporting NIST-based trust frameworks. So we're aligning with NIST 863-3. We're in sync with where they're headed with 863-4 on identity. And we're trying to connect these two together so you can have something that's called federated identity. None of us want to have to figure out how to remember multiple passwords and then think about having multiple portals when you're a consumer, or even if you're a provider, you've got multiple portals that you've got to interact with because you might work with multiple hospitals and you've got to have different user IDs and so forth. So being able to bring together fast identity, fast security in a collaborative model, taking advantage of existing standards, but putting it together in a Lego model that allows organizations in healthcare to be able to have trust and foundation in that secure capability of authentication and authorization and validation on that authentication and authorization of the identity as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. We talked a little bit about the federated identity management through CLEAR in different ways. And Brendan actually shared on the previous episode that we talked with him that he had just tested it tested his own kind of TEFCA exchange through CLEAR. And he said it was successful. He didn't have any issues. I don't think he had any real data to exchange with the entity that he was connecting his data to. But the point is, I love maybe explain a little bit, maybe explain what is a federated model so that just bring that down a little bit to first principles. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, and it really ties together what you just mentioned, because there are multiple what they call validated identity providers, CLEAR, ID.me, Ping Identity, you go down the line. And so one of the things we're looking at within the FAST Identity IG for the implementation guide and the framework is how do you centrally think about that from a business workflow process technically? So when we talk about federated, it's how do we know who you are on that initial end of the aspect, and then being able to log in, and then also being able to log into something else that might be connected to that, like an EHR system, as an example. So you may log into an app, then you may want to have that app be connected to the EHR. So you don't want to have to log in again, because there's, I think, stats that are up there in the high 80 to 90%. Once you have that second thing that you have to log into as a consumer or as anybody, it's like, wait a minute, that's too much work.
Yeah.
But yet, if you're going to log into something in your healthcare environment, you have to make sure that you're validated and it's secure, because the lawyers on the health plans and other side of the business want to make sure that you're assigning whomever it is to know what they're, agreeing to on consent, or what they might agree to on treatment or other aspects of things. So it's starting to give you the right infrastructure around the tokens, around the way you think about validation and authentication with OAuth and all of the things coming together with the different standards, so that it's seamless for providers, for the ability to have a national directory. We have to validate identity there. So the two key points are security and identity that we have to make sure are foundational, and then we can layer in consent and a national directory and some of the other capabilities. But it helps everybody on both sides, whether you're a provider or whether you're a consumer, to not have to worry about having to remember multiple passwords and to have a system that could be connected to know securely that you are who you say you are. And again, we have to think about all these assets out there about AIs and fakes and different things that people are concerned about, and being able to make sure that that's a secure, valid foundation.
Yeah, it's interesting because I appreciate what you said about if you've got to log into a second place, another portal, it's already decreasing your, engagement pretty significantly. And if you try to do that with 3 physicians to get it all in one place for the new surgeon, you're just almost going to not go into all those places. And each one of those entry points is an opportunity for hacking. And, and I so appreciate having the one place that is protected where you're making sure that the identity is, you are who you say you are. Something that I've noticed as I've been a health information professional, I think my first job was in 1997 in a health information capacity. So
I was in 8th grade, by the way.
Classy and just listen, okay. But I was thinking when I started as a health information professional, I mean, we had one male in our class. And then as I would go to meetings and listen, we might have 2 people at a statewide meeting, 2 men at a statewide meeting. And I've noticed a lot more men coming into the health information profession for health information management as well as health informatics. And so I've noticed also the opposite, where I've seen a whole lot more women getting into the IT side of things, cybersecurity specifically. So in what ways can those initiatives like Women in Cybersecurity that you're heavily involved with, how can that drive greater diversity, but also deeper technical leadership? And why is it critical for the future of interoperability for healthcare?
Well, I think that anytime you have diverse teams and viewpoints of people coming together, I think you get a lot stronger ability of understanding how to solve problems. People bring different perspectives. And I think that's why you see women that may be moving from one career into something that may be more technical or cybersecurity focused now, especially in healthcare. One, because obviously healthcare breaches are in the news quite frequently. So it's definitely a visibility issue out there. But I think there's a huge opportunity of what women can bring. There's a need to have more of a connected understanding of curiosity about business and know what's happening with the momentum of all the data that's moving around and the different types of data that exist in healthcare. So somebody that has healthcare background may come from clinical or other aspects, wants to move into more of the information technology side, brings the knowledge of how that works in the field. And when you're trying to implement secure environments and help organizations and employees and people understand the risk and how to mitigate that risk, I think there's a huge opportunity for women, especially women that have worked in healthcare, to kind of bring that forward and help them understand. Maybe the IT or more of the chief information officers know what the challenges are in the field, but vice versa, being able to help the people understand the impact of why it's so important and how so much is changing now with the impact of photos and data and what you capture and when you capture it relative to certain rules around HIPAA or other details in healthcare.
Yeah, it's interesting because the context, I see the context of health information being something that health information professionals really know. Most of our listeners are health information professionals, and they understand the context. So connecting them with IT teams and moving them into a role where you kind of marry up, just like you're talking about having those diverse teams. You marry up those function folks with the context folks, and you build a better, safer environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think about things that other people wouldn't have thought about, because some people have certain blinders on and think about things really in one way. And then you bring in a different aspect and you get a lot more conversations and open dialogue.
Yeah, that's what we talk about to a lot of health information professionals. We're kind of the hub of the wheel inside of the hospital or inside the healthcare setting because we understand the information flows as it goes from cradle to birth and account creation to retention and from entry to billing. Like we understand those processes fairly well, or at least we should. So having that ability to then communicate or at least translate that to someone that can code something, someone that's building or configuring something, is incredibly important. That's, I think, one thing that Shannan and I definitely talk about with folks is get outside of your comfort zone and start moving towards these other positions because you've got the knowledge. And Shannan or I are in traditional HIM roles and haven't been for a long time. So it's one of those things that we can use our experience to drive quite a bit. And as a dad for daughters, I'm excited about the expanding roles of women in these different pieces. Now, I don't know if I'm going to get them convinced to do that. My youngest she's going to be a gymnast,
fun.
and I'm like, well, gymnast doesn't pay the bills, honey. You got to find a job. So,
well, do they like certain types of creative games? Do they have curiosity about what's happening and so forth? Those are all interesting skill sets that kind of lead into that curiosity about learning of aspects, and they're going to grow up obviously in the foundation of technology and interaction. So you never know what they might come up with.
That's true. And you talk about growing up in tech, I had this conversation with, I can't remember who it was, but both my girls use AI tools exclusively now. And I heard the term that we are in the search generation and they're the prompt generation. And I think that's fascinating because it is like I've had to retrain myself over the past several years to not just go to Google and search for something or the good old days where I was asking Jeeves. And now I just prompt everything and I have a full conversation with the AI engine that I prefer. And it's a fascinating shift. It's normal to my girls. They're 13 and 11 at this point. So it's just normal for them to have a conversation with my oldest is a big fan of Grok. So she's like, I grokked it, and Grok and I had this conversation, and she'll, my wife and I were talking about some of their papers and whatnot, because they go to an online academy, and she'll have brainstorming sessions, my daughter will, with the AI engine about the construct of a paper and how she wants to do things. And I'm like, that is wild. I used to have to go to a library and look up the Dewey Decimal System. And she's just having a conversation with an AI engine. So it is encouraging to know that they're growing up in this type environment, and who knows where they'll go, but AI may do everything. I don't know. Maybe they won't have a job.
They may be more creative because of the questions they can ask and the visions of what they might think about in regards to the interactions you're describing that they have now.
It's very interesting. I bought my, I have grandkids, and probably when my granddaughter was 3.5 or 4, she's so curious and interested in how things work from kind of like an engineering mindset. I bought a robot that they code. So essentially it's already coded, and you follow certain patterns, and then the robot will behave a certain way. It's just a little bitty, I think it's Botley 2.0 or something. And it's fascinating. They love putting in those codes. It will make a fire truck sound and a police, and it'll do a ghost and different things. But it also allows you to create your own code and put it on, and make it behave a certain way. They loved that. So even her little brother loved it, but she definitely loved it more than he did. So Seth, they are growing up in the prompt generation and in robotics, in coding and development mindset from the beginning. It's so insane.
And then you can watch the Minecraft movie, which I watched last night, part of with my
okay. Something I never thought I'd say on this podcast.
Luckily, I can say I've never seen it. But the other side of these things is the cybersecurity side, and protecting that data, protecting the engines, the large language models that our kids are interacting with, and now our employees are interacting with. But I'm curious from a health information professional's perspective, what are some practical strategies that we can put in to protect patient data while not slowing things down and helping the speed of everything continue forward as we head towards this digital transforming world.
I think, being able to adopt scalable security models, which is really where we're at and what we're trying to do. The FAST security implementation guide will be required with FHIR over TEFCA January 1st of 2026 from a regulation perspective. So I think that's going to help kind of start to create that, as Amy Gleason described, the plumbing and the capability of starting to connect the industry. And then think about how we want to continue to support, because that's going to support a federated trust and a token-based access to have that dynamic client registration, which is what gives us that federated model that we were talking about earlier. And these are those foundational tools that are going to align with TEFCA, align and allow those organizations to scale across complex and growing exchange ecosystems, because we want to work with the QHINs and the quality health information networks for people that are not familiar with that acronym, and health information exchanges, and making the data, again, going back to the analogy of your daughters, their data is going to be so connected, they'll be able to proactively know where they are at what point in time with their health, and some of the things that can or could be happening in reference to people's interest in what their health is, and having the actual ability of that to be consolidated and coordinated in a way that could be used meaningfully, both from the outcomes of being able to work with providers or care if they need it, but more importantly, to be proactive and know, way ahead of time if they're going to have any issues with certain aspects of things that I think we're seeing now with the amount of chronic disease we have in our population.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a place that we get to where privacy of data is just not something that we worry about. And the way I'm not articulating the question well, but I think my girls at least know, or just keep them in the conversation here as they go forward. Their phones are listening to them. They're getting targeted advertisements. There's I don't think they have the same feeling of I have to protect my information as, say, my mother does, to where my mother's like, nobody's getting this, and everybody, I'm keeping all this to myself. And it's like, I wonder if as those generations change, if that will help the adoption of the technology, because my kids are more apt to understanding the connection of everything and being able to jump between apps and aggregate data into a single plate of glass, to where some generations are not quite there. Curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I think it will empower what we're trying to do in the next level of the opportunity with FAST, is that empowering patients through consent. Because if we can get to the data side and the connected ecosystem, then we can actually provide the individuals more of a granular ability to manage their consent appropriately, which is not really easy to do today in any environment. So maybe I do not mind certain aspects of my caregivers or my providers having certain aspects of the data, but based on certain changes that are happening in the women's side of health, and they may want to decide that, hey, maybe I don't. And I can cite an example. One of my young volleyball players that I work with is in college, and her college, she was playing a sport, beach volleyball, and her college wanted to track her sleep with Whoop and actually monitor their sleep. And if they didn't have a certain amount of hours of sleep, really hone in on their lifestyle. And it wasn't something that was written in any agreement or shared with them up front. And so it was kind of a uprising of the individual players to say, wait a minute, that's a little bit too encompassing on my life here. Maybe some guidance on nutrition or guidance on sleep or whatever you want to say, but going in and really, at the level, if you don't get X amount of hours per night, hey, I'm in college, you may have to study for tests. You may have a lot of other factors. And so I think people are going to have more of the ability to control that and be more interested in controlling that as we go forward, as people become educated.
That's interesting. I love this. Seth, thank you for bringing that up, because I love this contrast of things to consider. So right now, say, Janice, that we were in this place of their top 5 pillars from that the CMS RFI and discussion that everyone went to kind of at last minute in DC a few weeks ago, with TEPCA or TEPCA 2.0, whatever that's going to become, in this administration, and thinking about having that accessibility and Seth's daughters, right? And like the younger generation, compared to if TEPCA and all of this, if security and access were solved today, how much control would those young folks have over who gets what? The ones that are, we won't call them young folks, we'll say the ones that have grown up with technology versus boomers and a little bit older. Now, the younger generations of boomers, the ones on the lower end of that, younger end of that bubble, probably pretty tech savvy, but some of those aging that are at the top of that bubble may or may not be as tech savvy, right? So if that were solved today, I still think you have generational gaps where some users will not understand what they can actually control. How do we inform? This is not something we prep for, but how do we teach patients how to interact and appropriately share what they want to? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the gaps that definitely the CMS listening session brought out, is that there will need to be a lot of education around the transformation of what happens in the change. So having people know that they could actually opt out or control that maybe I don't want to give certain information to Dr. Bob, or given state privacy laws and the changes in states, again, using women's health and reproductive rights as one of the topics of concern, that is a huge issue and could be very volatile based on certain aspects of a woman's timing of her health. And so being able to control that and know that you could securely manage that appropriately to make sure it doesn't get to certain providers or maybe other parts of the healthcare industry itself, provided we don't have something that takes all of those rights away. I think that's important for individuals to have control over, and especially I think women in reference and other aspects of society as we look at some of the challenges of managing personal health.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. You're mentioning the women's health, which is certainly volatile. Then we consider, the focus currently on collecting SDOH or social determinant of health information that you may or may not want shared outside of your PCP who is in your community. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you don't want your surgeon to understand your full socioeconomic status or what your barriers are. And then we talked with Brendan about identity and biometrics being something that you would use. And, I do a jail ministry, and I think about some of those folks that are coming out of jail. They may not want all their information completely shared. And so as we exchange more data, we have to use the structures that exist. And you can do this with diagnosis codes, right? Women's health things, social determinants of health, they have their own section of codes. CPT and HIPcast procedure type codes, like you have those things that you can wall off, but we're going to have to get better at defining what's out of that structure that should or should not be shared. And then technically, I know we could do that, but to your point, educating the user, the patient, right? That's who we have to educate on. Hey, you got to make sure that you understand. We can share all of your diagnosis and procedure information or a part of it, right? We can share all of your socioeconomic information, or we can share part of it, or you can selectively share. So we have to get smarter at how we leverage the structure as healthcare interoperability and exchange folks, but then we also have to educate in a way that people understand. So I love that. One final question as we get ready to close. You mentioned the qualified health information networks, or the QHINs. And this is all kind of we don't know yet if these are going to work, right? They're kind of like HIEs in that they haven't been proven yet, right? Like HIEs when they first started, they're proven now, but it took a while, right? And there are a few sustainable models that are working for some HIEs, but a lot of our HIEs, folded after the grant funding, so to speak, was gone. So what do you think about this new movement and this pace of things in this administration, does this help or hinder the QHINs from becoming sustainable?
I think it's always been a question around how you share data, because everybody wants to figure out who owns it and who's going to manage it in regards to the financial value of that information. And then you think about the value of the 21st Century Cures Act and patient access. As a patient, I would like to have certain providers know a lot more about me across multiple providers in order to get the best, outcome, because it shouldn't be siloed in reference to how that, would be. But I think there's still a lot out in the air for how the QHINs and the data flow will really come together. And sub-participants and the conversations of, what that means and where it matters. And then, of course, there's discussions on what can truly be set up as enforcement, which I know Brendan and others have commented on. I will say, back to your biometric, I did notice in some of the comments from the CMS RFI that there were some very specific discussions on identity to say we need options, and we don't want everything to be biometric and down to a certain level. We want to have levels of options based on individuals and some of the preferences they may have personally.
Yeah, this is such a fascinating conversation. Seth, do you have any final questions? I know we're getting close. We need to probably end pretty soon, but I want to make sure we're covering everything that's in your head.
Yeah, well, there's a lot going in my head. I'm sitting there thinking a new business opportunity that you and I need to talk about after this conversation. But the other side of it is this is so, like, as soon as I feel like there's progress being made in identification, in digital identities, those type things that we've struggled with in the past, I realize, all right, well, if we're getting to a point where we can solve the digital identity and the identification of the patient perspective and empower them to be able to share information, but then I just realized, well, the medical record itself has exploded in the amount of content and data that's in it, and it's just becoming even more complicated. By the time we figure out how to identify the patient and give them the power to do this, the medical record's 10 times the size that it used to be. And then you add in AI generated information, and it's like, well, does that include ambient room recordings? Does it include video files? And is that in part of this? And it's like, so my brain in this whole conversation is like, well, I'm excited about the future, but I'm also going, the problem's getting worse as we keep going forward.
Well, and I think they've got to think like, I went outside the health system recently with My Function Health, an organization that basically allows you to do some blood tests and then gives you some really good, analysis and a dashboard. And they will eventually, as you get through the route that they go. But it was a really simple process in how I signed up, how I knew my data was protected, how they automatically gave me a screen to allow me to set up the appointments that worked with my schedule, how they reminded me of the appointments, how they sent me the code through my phone. So when I got to the actual appointment, I could put the code in the little kiosk they had to check in, because there was no humans involved in, all of this stuff. So it's there, and it's being cultivated, I think, in a lot of offline types of ways for certain types of healthcare. Did the same thing with a mammogram MRI, outside the system, but, again, very simple, very easy, coordinated, organized, no mix-ups.
Yeah.
Where, the system, when I did the other side of the mammogram, I got it set up with 2 appointments and at the same time, and, it was just confusing. And so I think there are organizations and technology and companies that have come together that are starting to do things that are very simple, that engages the consumer, gets them involved, gets them feedback. And if we can get that into the larger system in a way that is meaningful for where the industry is going with value-based care and trying to, figure out how to better service and, minimize some of the fraud and abuse that may be out there, it's just a lot of the pieces, but it's all around the data. And the ability of connecting that data and then allowing the individuals that access that data, making sure that they can do that in a secure, validated, authenticated way, so that everything starts to come together. And I think this administration, if they want to have their Make America Healthy Again initiative really make a difference, it has to be around the things that the industry has been working on for a while, to your point. but starting to come together. And I think
Yeah.
AI might be able to present certain types of data from records in a much more meaningful way than what I've seen in the past with, again, blood tests or other results that are a lot of words and numbers that you have to put into ChatGPT or something else and say, okay, what does this mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Seth, I think about our professionals that are in the health information management profession, and I think about how we know what you don't, but a lot of us who've spent time coding medical records for diagnosis and procedure, for data and initiatives and prognosis and population health, but also revenue cycle. From a revenue cycle perspective, our coding guidelines are written on paper. Our coding guidelines do not include today's technology. So you can't code you can't code the AI things. It has to be physician documented. And if it's not a workflow that AI is generating and that physician is really reviewing and signing off on, this is what's happening, and I can show resources that have been applied to that condition, we can't code for those things. And so if we're going to let AI assign protocols or diagnoses or explain or express procedures, we've got to have modern coding guidelines. That's something we've not talked about. So, Janice, thank you so much. I love this conversation. I could learn from you all day. I do want to ask one thing before we close. This is not a deep question. It's can you share a link with Seth and I to put in the show notes or in the post here so that women in cybersecurity, some links to that we could engage some of our listeners. They can go and check that out and maybe reach out to you or get involved somehow.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll include the WiCyS link, and then also the BISO initiative. We have a quarterly presentation with actual BISOs, and the next one is in September. So I'll send you that link as well.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Send that to us, and we'll put that in so that anybody listening to this can go to the the LinkedIn post, and go and click on those and find out more. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I always enjoy working and talking with both of you. It's great to pontificate about the opportunities in the industry and what we need to do in Tennessee in particular to make it happen. We have the opportunity to be a model state, I think.
We do.
Very much so. All right, Shannan, until next time, my friend.
See you next time, buddy.